Hi, I'm Otto Penzler. We're here at the Mysterious Bookshop in Tribeca, in Lower Manhattan in New York City. And this is our ongoing series about collecting mystery fiction. And today we're going to talk about, I have to say, one of my very favorite writers. One of the first writers that I read after I read The Golden Age. I was reading almost exclusively after Sherlock Holmes and some Victorian writers. I was reading almost exclusively Golden Age writers like Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie, Ellery Queen, John Dixon Carr. And then I read some hard-boiled stuff, Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, and Mickey Spillane. Mickey Spillane is not like any other writer, or wasn't like any other writer. He's no longer with us. He had a very colorful life. He grew up in a tough neighborhood in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and became a comic book writer. He started out writing for the slick magazines, the high-paying magazines. Eventually went back to the pulps, but which is unusual. Most writers started out in the pulps and graduated to the slicks, but Mickey started with the slicks and then went to the pulps. But mainly, he was writing comic books. He was one of the creators of Captain Marvel and Captain America. Um, in He was also a circus performer. Uh, he was a catcher on the high wires. He would catch the guys for Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. In World War II, he trained pilots and fought combat missions. And when he came back, he worked with the FBI and helped them break up a narcotics ring. And until the very end, he would be happy to show you the scars from the two gunshot wounds that he had on that case. When he started writing novels, he began with I, the Jury, a famous book that's now been filmed twice, and created Mike Hammer. Mike Hammer was probably the toughest of all the tough PIs. Uh, he, they were so popular, incredibly successful. He became the best-selling mystery writer in America of all time, with the exception of Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote more than 80 books. When Mickey uh, became the second best-selling mystery writer in America, he'd only written 7. And there was a survey taken of the 10 best-selling mysteries of all time, and 7 of the 10 were Mickey Spillane's first 7 books. Critics hated him. They accused the books of being too violent, too sexy, too dirty, and one of the critics, came to him and said, "So how do you account for the fact that you have 7 of the best-selling books of all time?" And Mickey said, "I don't like your tone. I'm going to write 3 more." So the sex and vulgarity that he was accused of in those early books is hilarious. There was never a sex scene in a Spillane book. In the very later books, when mores in America changed, there were, but not in those days. Everything that happened off screen. The bedroom door closed, and that was it. The violence, I'll concede the violence. He certainly wrote scenes of violence. Mike Hammer was really tough. He didn't mind breaking somebody's arm, shooting them in the gut. There was a scene in One Lonely Night where he's fighting a bunch of communists. There's a communist cell that is wreaking havoc in New York. And he gets into a fight with 2 big thugs and knocks them out and beats them up. He's got to go somewhere else to rescue somebody. So he takes it happens in a sawmill. As I remember, it's a sawmill, but it was a place like that if it wasn't exactly a sawmill. And takes one of the guys who he's knocked out, puts his hand on the table, grabs a huge spike and a hammer, and slams it down really hard on his hand to go into the floor so he can't possibly get up. And he says, Wait for me, I'll be back later. So that's a little bit about who Mike Hammer is. So just you know who we're dealing with. Now he started out in hardcover with Dutton, and he stayed with Dutton through his whole life. He was very loyal to that company, who had helped make him a bestseller. Although it was the paperbacks really that sold in just absolutely massive quantities. But he stayed with Dutton, and Dutton is a wonderful company for collectors, so that there's no question about what is a first edition. So here's one of the very early books, The Long Wait, and here's a lesser copy. But I'm going to show you this copy. Dutton, on the copyright page, takes all the mystery out of it. They say first edition. And that is true of every one of the early books. And this, because the jacket is chipped and so on. These early books in hardcover, you have to remember, this was the most popular writer in America. And they got read to death. People didn't save them. They didn't think, oh, this is precious, let me put it on my shelf. So all of the books have where it's almost impossible to find really sharp copies of these books. So this one is a little more chipped than some others, so it's not very expensive. It's $85. But here, this is great. I just love to see this. Here's Mickey's autograph. And it was his most, Dick Francis almost always wrote hi when he was inscribing a book. But Mickey always wrote a long range hello, or it's great to see you. He was very friendly. As a person, he was the most warm, outgoing, nicest guy you could possibly meet. He became a Jehovas Witness in the early, after those first 7 books, there was a long hiatus. There were no Spillane books being written. And a lot of people didn't understand why. Well, he was a Jehovah's Witness, so he went out on the mission. I think it was 7 years of going out and proselytizing. Here's another terrific early book. I think this is a second book, if my memory serves. I'm pretty sure it is. And here's another autograph. And once again, I'll show you the copyright page, just to prove my point that it's always there, that they were very consistent. There's the first edition line. And this is actually a really nice copy of this book. It's got a little wear at the ends of the spine and so on. But because it's in such good shape and it's autographed, it's $1,250, just so that there's no. Here's One Lonely Night. Look at this cool cover. Once again, there's the copyright page with first edition. Later, as so many publishers did, here's another Mike Hammer novel, again from Dutton, but now they've gone to the system that so many publishers move to, using a number line, which has to go down to number 1. This is much later in his career. These books were in the early books that I showed you are all in the late 40s and the 50s. He created another character named Tiger Man. This is quite a bit later. The covers are a little bit different from the early ones, which were, I think, really pretty cool. In fact, if I can go back, Charles pointed this out to me. Look at the cover. Almost all of the early books showed the dust jacket of I, the Jury, just reminding everybody that he was the author of I, the Jury, which became such a massive bestseller. And that cover appears on almost all of the early books. Tiger Man was his later character. He was fighting communist agents in these books. Mickey was virulently anti-communist, but even in the 60s, when these were published, there's the first edition line. on the copyright page. So there's a couple of, by the way, one of the early Spillane books, almost all of the early books were filmed. And in one of them, The Girl Hunters, he starred in the movie as Mike Hammer. He appeared on television variety shows early, like for really older folks. Younger readers will have no idea what I'm talking about, but the Milton Berle Show was a very popular comedy entertainment show, and Mickey was on that show several times, and then became, I would argue, the most, aside from Ernest Hemingway, the most recognized writer in America. Most writers, even if they're really famous, you wouldn't know them if they walked down the street. You wouldn't recognize Robert Ludlum, you wouldn't recognize John Grisham, as ordinary people, that they're just unknown. Mickey starred in a Miller Lite commercial, which was so successful, it ran for 25 years. 25 years. What commercial runs 25 years? Of course, he was always in a trench coat, and there was always a beautiful blonde in every commercial. Speaking of beautiful blondes, Mickey has been married a couple of times. His second marriage was to Sherry Spillane, who served as a model for 2 of his books. That's Sherry's behind. They were so different. Nobody understands how this marriage lasted. And I think Mickey is among those people who didn't understand it. Mickey loved living in a tiny little fishing village in South Carolina named Murrells Inlet, where his ideal day was getting up at 6 in the morning, going to the local diner where he knew all the guys and knew the waiters and waitresses and so on, and going out and fishing on his little boat. He said he only wrote for money. He never wrote when he didn't need money. Norman Mailer said, it doesn't matter why you write, the question is whether it's good. And so Mickey then stopped writing for a while, and then there was a terrible hurricane down there which wiped out his house, lost his manuscript, and cost him a lot of money. And so he wrote a few more books because he had to rebuild his house and so on. But his marriage to Sherry was peculiar because she loved bright lights, big city, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, New York. And I don't know if I'm supposed to tell this or not, but what the heck. They would meet twice a year in New York and stay at the Plaza Hotel and barely left the room for 2 weeks. And then he would go back to Murrells Inlet. She would go back out to LA or Las Vegas or wherever she was. But that was the essence of their marriage. His third wife, by the way, Jane, is a lovely woman. He met her when she played with Mickey's little daughter when they were both in grammar school. And she grew up to be Miss Mississippi, was it, or Alabama, South Carolina? I think South Carolina. And they were married for more than 30 years of bliss, and she was just a wonderful, wonderful person. So Mickey also wrote some standalones. Here's a strange example where 2 different jackets on the same book, just as a way of, trying some new marketing thing. They used Mickey's photo on the back. This is from the movie where he was playing Mike Hammer, as a commonly used photo. Again, it's still Dutton, and they're still on the copyright page, still doing first edition on the copyright page. There's no priority known between these 2 jackets. So they were issued simultaneously. And then very late books. This is after he died. Max Allan Collins And Mickey became very, very close friends. And Al, Max Allan Collins, finished. Mickey would start books. He was a very fast writer, and he would start books and then write the ending, and then eventually fill in the middle. And he left a lot of manuscripts that were partial. He lost interest. He didn't know what he wanted to do. He had a better idea for another book, so he kept writing and just saving all the manuscripts. Max Allan Collins, because Mickey stated this in his will, and with the approval of Jane, Mickey's widow, Al then finished writing many of the books. I published 3 of them, but other publishers have also done them. There were a lot of things left over. And here's a Hard Case Crime, a late book. And then here at the bookshop, we published this. These are short stories. There's that famous photo of him again as Mike Hammer. This is a collection of short stories that had not been ever collected before. So there's Mickey Spillane.